So it's day 30 here in New Zealand, morning of. It is also the morning of ANZAC Day, which is, if you're not from here and you don't know what that is, ANZAC Day is sort of the commemorative day for Australians and Kiwis to commemorate the sacrifices made by soldiers in World War I and II, because Australia and New Zealand fought together in those wars. And ANZAC stands for that. So ANZAC is Australia New Zealand Army Corps. So usually what happens is that you get up at dawn and there's a dawn prayer or a ceremony in the town centre of every town in New Zealand and Australia. There's usually a larger service that's broadcasted from Gallipoli, which is where a large amount of our fighting happened. And there's usually a parade in like every town or city to give recognition to the people that are working in the army currently, and then of course to give commemoration to those that have passed. And it's a very sombering service. And I think one thing that I've always liked about ANZAC Day is that it's never, ever been about glorifying the army or even glorifying the war or glorifying anything. It doesn't romanticize their deaths. We're very specific and real about the horrible sacrifices that were made. And I think that's more important. And in New Zealand and Australia, the common term that we use is lest we forget, which is a line from a poem talking about how we'll never forget the sacrifices made. But it's also important because it's not just saying we won't forget you or the sacrifices that you've made. It's saying we won't forget what led up to this. It's saying in order to honor those soldiers, the best thing we can do is avoid war at all costs and make sure that we don't end up in a world where that can happen again. Because it was an incredibly devastating time for the ANZACs, both Australia and New Zealand. I think New Zealand actually had the highest rate of casualties per capita of any country. And part of it's because we didn't have many people here at the time. We were still a very young colony. And so when it came to drafting, over 10% of our population actually went over there to fight. And our casualty rate, unfortunately, was around 60%. So we had a huge casualty rate. And that's largely down to the fact that it's known now that we were really used by the powers in charge as pawns. We were placed strategically into places where people knew there was no chance of surviving. So yeah, that's one thing that we do every year on the 25th of April. Besides that today though, it is the 30th day. And I was thinking about this because it's always been my understanding that it takes 30 days to make a habit. You know, and in the past, whenever I've tried to make a new habit in my life, I've tried to implement it for 30 days first. And it generally works. I mean, if you do something every day at the same time for 30 days, you're probably going to continue doing it. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because with 30 days in isolation, I'm starting to think that maybe, by way of it being compulsory, New Zealanders are making a habit of isolation. Maybe not so much in a bad way. I'm sure there are some negative sides to this. I think coming out of isolation is going to be difficult. I'm saying that purely from a self perspective. I think it's going to be quite hard for me to motivate myself after this to actually actively hang out with people. As much as I do want to hang out with them. It's not that I don't want to, but I do get social anxiety sometimes. And sometimes I get really worried about hanging out with people because I'm concerned about not being worth their time. I know that's quite a silly thing, but it is. And it's a very natural thing. I think everyone feels that at some point. And I think after a period of isolation as long as this, we might all experience that a wee bit. So there might need to be some form of coaching as to how to get people to hang out and interact again. Who knows? But I also went to the supermarket this morning. And I think that is the first example I've seen of New Zealand actually maybe making a habit of this isolation thing. I mean, at the beginning of this, the shelves were constantly empty. People were panic buying. There was never any toilet paper. There was never any bread. But now the supermarkets are generally pretty full. There's tons of hand sanitizer, tons of bread. It's very normal. I mean, apart from the fact that you have to line up outside in tents and you have to stay 2 meters away from each other. It's also compulsory that you take a trolley with you, even if you're only getting 1 or 2 items, because the trolley now is more of a way of keeping your distance from people. And there are lines or squares or, X's outside to show you where you should be standing. So I feel sorry for the guy who had to do this, but somebody per supermarket in the country has had to go around and measure out 2-meter distances and then sellotape an X on the ground to say that you can only stand here. There's also arrows in the supermarket now that tell you which ways you can go up and down the aisles. So at the moment, in terms of being adaptable, you really have to write your shopping list in order of how you find the items in the store, because you can only go one way and then out. Otherwise you have to buy them and then go back outside and then back in again. But it is an example of people adapting though. I think everyone's gotten used to it. It's day 30, we have been doing this for a while now. We have been committing to this habit for 30 days. And I think we're starting to get used to it. Besides that, as it is day 30 in isolation and also ANZAC Day, I thought one thing that I could do today to occupy myself, whilst also keeping in the spirits of this commemorative day, is I found a bunch of old film reels that I took in my first year of high school. And incidentally, they were from an ANZAC Day. Now I don't have hard copies of those photos, but I found an app online that advertises that it can take film and turn it into digital copies. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna try and take my old films and make them into digital copies. And if it doesn't work, then I'll just have to say goodbye for now and happy day 30, and lest we forget.